in architecture or just in a built environment. It's across all of society. And while people have had awareness that have grown and they've said, yeah, we're going to do something about this, the data is still showing that we have a structural problem and it's urgent and we need targeted action. You have got in some sectors 50% or more than 50% of the people who are working in an organisation can identify that they are not of the same worth as a man, and we have to do something to change that. And what we are doing at RIBA is that we have commissioned a major new project with the Fawcett Society, which is the UK's leading charity who campaign on gender equality. I talked about that earlier when I introduced myself. And what we're trying to do there is to capture hard data and experience with the literature review, looking at a survey of women in architecture and in-depth interviews. But what I think it is going to demonstrate is that this is a structural issue and this is something that we need action and we need to change. So yeah, it is a problem, but we're going to do something about it and we've got to do that collectively.
Steve, what about yourself? Do you still see it as an issue when you're recruiting?
It depends on the organisation you're dealing with. For ourselves, with the larger organisations now, they have solid pay bandings. You touched on it in the presentation. If you've got a good pay banding in process, that allows people to be assessed based on their worth as an individual in terms of their capability, their skills, etc. But more often than not, it's what when people are in existing roles where they've just worked their way up, they don't see the same growth that they would see if they were a male counterpart. And it's hard. I don't see it anywhere. When I come into recruitment 20 years ago, it was very clear, and you'd even hear things spoke about, certain line managers have different, very, very misogynistic approaches and opinions towards it. I don't hear these anymore. But what you still see is that disparity. And it's only when I'm pulling someone out of one organisation into another one, and they realise their true worth. That might be a quantity surveyor who's been on 35 grand for the last 5 years. And then they find out that actually that role is now worth 47 grand, 50 grand, for what they're doing. And they only realise that then when they put their head above the parapet and start looking for that next opportunity, because they're not aware of it, So things like this, that brings it to the forefront, gives us all an opportunity, not just to discuss it, but actually take positive action, Oh,
that's great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Valerie. Any questions? No one's put their hands up, so we will carry on. What practical advice would you give to someone, Steve, that's looking to ensure that they're being paid fairly? So if you've got somebody moving into a new role, what advice would you give them?
Personally, communication is always key. You have to understand, if there isn't a fixed banding in place within the organisation, you've got to understand what this role is worth. You've got to understand what your own worth is as well within the organisation. What do you bring to the table and what your capability is. Communication's key. More often than not, I see people within my own team, never mind candidates that I speak to or clients, they let it get to the point where it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and then they start ranting about a situation where it's unfair, as opposed to trying to understand the situation and build and then communicate clearly where they're up to. First of all, do your research, find out what that role is supposed to be paying, where you sit within the role, the banding, etc., or the bracket. If you don't have solid bandings in place, once you can understand where you should be, then you can start communicating with the HR or your hiring manager, your line manager. If you're not being listened to, you have to escalate, then the senior management team, the directors, whatever you need to do, you have to communicate correctly and escalate this to a point where you can address the situation and find out that you are or how you are going to be on that fair pay scale and being paid in line with everybody else, regardless of gender,
Cheers, Steve. Valerie?
Yeah, I think listening to what Stephen has said, he is correct. But I think first of all, you've got to do your research. You've got to know that, as you said, a particular job is, if it's been advertised, are most people on 45 or is it 40? What's the band? You've got to have confidence about your value. And I think you picked up on it, Genna, that women tend not to be prepared to negotiate. Now, I don't know if if that's research or that's assumption, but I'm just saying you've got to be prepared to negotiate. And there are different ways you can find out what is the right salary for a post. We've done in RIBA, we've got a salary calculator and industry reports that help to benchmark the role. But I think that people need to make sure that when they're doing this negotiation, they think for themselves, this is a fair compensation for my skills. And what you shouldn't do as a woman, sometimes you've got hiring organizations who'll say, we start you at the bottom, or everybody starts at the bottom. I would check that sometimes, because some people push back and say, because of XYZ reasons, I need another 3,000, and that gets through. So I think you need to understand the policy of that organization about that, not just the pay band and pay structures, but their policy. Because if they haven't got an open pay structure, salary band, and this issue, if it's a policy, everybody starts at the bottom, but if there's a room to maneuver, that's when you find that the men can maneuver and the women will more likely be told you're going to be at that bottom. And for me, this is what we're doing here, has been about being fair and about being equitable. And there has to be that in a culture if you really want to work in that organization. If someone is in their role and they think or suspect there's a pay disparity, there's got to be issues that they need to look at as well about that. But yeah, I think Steve said some good things.
Fab, thank you both. Simon, you put your hand up.
Yeah, it's a question for Steve, really. How do you balance the fair pay with affordability?
Well, that's one of the things that I'd done a survey earlier before I came on this, just to see why the pitch was thinking it was an EU survey. And one of the things that came up for our business, never mind for the wider businesses that we recruit for, is you've got to take into account profits, and you've got to take into account what funds are available. This shouldn't be based on gender ever. This should be based on what you can afford to pay your staff as a whole. You know, I've got staff always come to me, cost of living's gone up, interest rates have gone up, we need X. And the answers for me is always, well, what are you going to do in order, or what do you justify to get X? And you've got to clearly define what needs to be done in terms of key performance indicators if you can achieve X, Y, and Z. I work in sales, so it's very easy to work that out. The more you generate, the more we can afford to pay. When you're talking to your client pool, it is different. If they've got a site agent, that site agent's one of 300 people on a particular project. You can't then balance it based on the simplest of things, and it certainly can't be based on return and revenue, can it? Because it's got to be delivered the job. So that's why you've got to then look at the bandings and the scales and work out where it fits. But again, this should never be based on gender. It should be based on capability and what you bring in terms of expertise. For most of my clients, women are really underrepresented. So what we've got to do is find a way of encouraging more women to apply. And that's one of the big head scratches I've had over the last 10 years is, how do you get women to apply for a site agent or a construction manager or a project manager? Genna touched on it earlier in like the quantity surveys and certain roles. There's good representation now, a heck of a lot better than it was when I started out in 2006. But in certain areas, we still scramble to get people to apply in the first place. But what you will find is they've actually got a much better opportunity, if they are suitably skilled and qualified, of course, to take on these jobs. It's understanding your worth and where you'd fit in, and that's the biggest trouble for me, But it definitely it comes down to affordability as well at the same time for individuals. Just to go back to what you were saying, Simon, because I do like to go off on a tangent.
No, it's great. It's just you're absolutely spot on. It's based on ability, not gender. Sorry, Valerie.
Yeah, I was going to add, when I started at RIBA, there was an exercise to make sure that we did a complete review of all the pay of the staff, other than the executive team, but all other staff. And we did that review, and we put aside a budget to make sure that if there were anomalies, whether on gender. Some of it was based on regions and all sorts of different criteria. But we did look at that, and the results were interesting in that you did have people doing the same role at the same level, but their pay was different. And as I said, it wasn't just gender, there was all sorts of reasons. But what we did do is make sure that as an objective, as something that we thought was a priority, we carved out some of our budget and we did a complete assessment of everybody's pay and made sure that there was parity at that stage. So it is about money at the end of the day, but it was a priority for the organisation, and we deprioritise other things to make sure that we've done that exercise. So from 2024, everyone was had got their pay assessed to make sure that if there was issues that we had identified that and closed those gaps.
Cheers, Valerie. Thank you. Katie, you've just popped your hand up.
Sorry, I'm on mute. So in terms of like people at the same job level being paid the same amount, is there any consideration of whether somebody's good at doing their job or not? Because in some ways, if somebody's better at their job but at the same level as someone else, shouldn't they be paid more anyway? How does that work?
Well, I'm trying to understand, Katie. Do you mean there's two people who have got the same job description, but one person is doing that same job better than the other person? I think it's about paying
yes,
rewards.
That's exactly what I mean. So two people are doing the same job. One of them is twice as efficient as the other. Should they still be paid the same amount?
I'll hand that to Stephen. It's about pay and reward.
Yeah.
And
Definitely
I'm
not.
One,
yeah. I always go back to my industry because it's very easy to see. I mean, we've got consultants within our organisation who are on 60, 70% of target. They should be paid the same as the person who's on 150% of target? I mean, certainly not. You know, they're not working as efficiently, but it's easy to do when you can measure it based on our metrics.
Exactly, yeah.
It depends on the work that they're doing, but no, in my opinion, and that's why brackets or bandings are ideal, because the bottom of the banding for the people who are doing the job, and then the top of the bracket for the people who are excelling in every way. Mm-hmm. I have people who have the opinion, I've done this job for 10 years, so I deserve to be paid more than John over there or Shirley over there, who's only been doing it for 2. And like, well, Shirley's doing it twice as well as you are in terms of every KPI that we measure you on. So why should you be paid more just because you've been here longer? You know, it's got to be, there's a number of factors, and every role can be different, can't it? You know, but for me, your productivity and your value should be what determines what you were paid, not the length of service or the gender or anything else, you know. But it's hard in certain roles, I appreciate, because you could be doing exactly the same job to the T. It's just one of you is doing it a heck of a lot better, you know.
It's very hard to measure, though, isn't it?
It is. Well, that's it. It's for certain things you can have clear KPIs, and it can be very clear how it's done. You can metrics in place to measure these things. But in roles where you can't, it then becomes a manager's opinion, doesn't it? You know, and that's when it can be very grey area, so to speak.
Simon.
Yeah, there's a number of things you've raised. One is that length of time doing something is no evidence of competence. That's the first thing I'd say. In Katie's case, if someone's doing a job better than someone else, why is the person who's not doing the job as well not being helped and coached to do the job better? So there's an issue there about how you help develop and support your people who may not be performing as well as they could do in comparison to others. And in very small organisations such as ours, we have objectives in annual and biannual reviews, and that's one of the best ways of identifying how someone's performing is checking on what their objectives are. Have you met them? Is there a problem meeting them? And there's a whole load of things we can do to support people, but the most important thing is if they're not performing as well as you'd like them to do, is give them the support they need, the training they need, the mentoring they need, and that's really critical.
Valerie?
Yeah, I won't say much because Simon has taken my top lines. I think there is an issue. Yeah, no, there is an issue, and I see it in a number of different organisations. I've been here 20 years doing this job. Somebody came in 2 years ago doing the same job, job descriptions. However, they've been assessed in their performance appraisal, whatever, better than me. How can that be? I've been sitting here 20 years doing this job. And I think it is about making that appraisal and assessment of individuals. They've got to have targets and they've got to be assessed. And there's arguments to and pro and con about performance related pay, really difficult, and differential pay. But I have found, and if we bring it back to the whole issue about women, that I've been in organizations where I've been in a leadership position and I've sat and said, I've noticed if you are going to award somebody a 3, you can have either a 1, you're not performing, no increase in salary. 2, you get CPI. And if you get a 3, you get CPI plus something. And you notice that all of the people during that conversation who were getting 3s and getting good salary increases were men. And I remember saying, what's going on here? And they said, oh, all these men, they go beyond what everyone else has gone. They go drinking in the evenings, all the receptions, and they're making the assessment not on the work of the individuals. They're talking about things outside of work, drinking and so forth, which isn't something that is unfair in certain areas, because they will find that the men will be more easier to hit those drinking and the pub targets. And that's a perception, not about their work. It's another perception. So there's all sorts of things that we have to look at when people start to talk about somebody and the assessing if they're up to it. And you will find that in a number of instances, and it's not just about having caring responsibilities, there's all the perceptions about somebody who's like the lads, and they will get a higher scoring than other individuals who are generally women. Not all the time, but generally.
Thanks, Valerie. The lovely Steph has joined us, and you had your hand up a moment ago, Steph. So did you want to add to that?
I did, but then, yeah, sorry I'm late, by the way. But yeah, I think for me, again, it's trying to bring it back to the gender pay gap. And I think I was going down a bit of a rabbit hole when I was listening, that managers just need to get really good at giving feedback as well, because just listening in around the capability and performance related pay, actually, that is probably a really, really important thing, but actually we're probably here to discuss gender pay. So that's why I took my hand down. But I think, yeah, it's a really, really valid point that, yeah, if somebody is doing a different job, the same job but at a different pace, and that's a different conversation. And actually gender pay is a whole different subject in itself. But I like how we just touched there briefly on sort of the family friendly element. And yes, they might have care and responsibilities, but I think as an employer as well, it's not just making, our maternity policies enhanced to attract more females. It's also about actually encouraging men to take shared parental leave and actually change that dynamic as well. So there's a whole range of things that you can do around the gender pay gap. But I think, yeah, that goes from benefits to pay and reward to, yeah, just getting better at, I guess, a load of other things as well. So it was just really interesting because I was late, so apologies for that. But listening to the different opinions there, and yeah, really interesting.
Cheers, Steph. Right, so I'll throw the next question to you then, Steph, as your punishment.
Okay.
So if there's anyone on the call that's already in an organisation and they think that there is a pay gap between them and what other people are being paid, how can they advocate for themselves? What do they need to do, and what can employers do to reduce that gap?
Yes, I think it is on the business. I think that's a business issue. It isn't on the person as an issue. However, what they need to do is really document their case. And I don't know if you were talking about it when I first joined the call about 10 minutes ago, but seek a fair review. And it's not always a comfortable conversation going to your employer about your pay. But actually, I think being good isn't enough sometimes, and we need to advocate for ourselves. Nobody else is going to advocate for you. So you do really need to sort of approach it professionally, do your research, look at Glassdoor reviews, for example, or ask your HR team. If you've got that relationship with them and you are in a big organisation, but you maybe don't have internal banding frameworks that you can look at, ask for some advice externally and see what you can do. I think networking's a great tool. Get on LinkedIn, ask people questions. I mean, since I've changed my job title to head of people, I get inundated every day, and people are comfortable to talk to people outside of their own business, and let's just make use of that. I think document your case, ask for a fair review, and then approach it professionally. And if you don't get where you want to be and you feel that you've done everything within reason, then that's actually on the business after that, in my opinion. And I think we need to be in a safe space where we can raise these concerns. And I guess on the flip side, as an employer, if I was speaking to an employer, is really encourage that. I think be transparent internally about what you pay, because again, that will help you attract the right talent to your business, and hopefully keep people retained. And again, just do morally the right thing, should I say. But yeah, that's probably my answer to it.
Cheers, Steph. Steve, have you got anything to add to that?
There's not a lot I can add to that. I think Steph's covered everything perfectly. But I mean, it's the communication is always the key part, isn't it? It's getting your facts straight. I mean, using people like Steph or recruitment businesses to benchmark isn't a bad idea either. You know, if you don't know what the rate should be or the salary should be on a particular role, like Steph said, then go outside of it, speak to recruitment consultants who specialize in that particular niche area. They'll tell you, you know, for your level of expertise, what you should be getting within a reasonable swing. It depends on the industry, etc. But they'll give you a better insight. But when you get that information, present it, you know, well, don't fly off the handle with it. Make sure that it's constructive, and then you should be well within your right to have a decent and reasonable conversation, whether it's your HR team, whether it's your line manager, you know, and if you're not being listened to, then you've got to escalate it, you know, and then if it's still not getting listened to and it's not fair, well, then you've got to assess your situation within the organisation, haven't you? You know, because obviously there's definitely something wrong then, but really it's just about good communication to start with, you know.
Simon, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Steph. We had Tomorrow's Leaders meeting last year, and one of the questions was, how do I go about getting a pay rise? And it's quite a fascinating question from someone who sometimes allows pay rises and someone who's asked for a pay rise. And the critical thing I think you've all mentioned is have an evidence base as to why you want that pay rise. It's no good just saying I want some money. Well, that's great, we all like more money, but what are the metrics you're going to give me to convince me that pay rise is worthwhile? I think that's the first thing. The second thing, from your experience, is do you see a difference in pay geographically? So we're based up in the north of Manchester, where it is sunny regularly at the moment, and a lot of people are based down in London. Do you see, from your expertise and your profession, difference in salaries depending on geography?
Yeah, I definitely do, especially when you look at London. Obviously, you're always going to. However, with that being said, I mean, I live in Blackpool, so it's not a highly going rate there. But actually, down the road is Manchester, and I wouldn't ever say that I don't think if I looked hard enough and I put myself forward enough for enough things and like they presented myself well, I do think I could probably earn the same rate of pay up north somewhere, even if it's in a city, Leeds, Manchester. You might have to travel a little bit further, but I definitely see pay discrepancies in geographical locations, but I wouldn't necessarily rule that as, okay, because I'm going to live here, I definitely can't earn that. So yeah, I'd be mindful of that though, for sure, especially you see it with recruiters all the time. It's a challenge that they face as well. But again, going back to probably the first question, the first answer that you were looking for there, it's your actual remuneration isn't just your base pay. When you're going for a job, like I'm looking at bonus packages, I'm looking at what kind of car benefit I get, and all of that. I know it's not your baseline pay, but it's all really, really important, and it is a benefit at the end of the day and part of your package. So they're all things that you can factor in. I mean, if you get a nice Mercedes, for example, but your pay is a little bit less, but it's electric and you're not paying high on tax. I mean, they're all things that we think day to day, they do really have an impact on us. So yeah, it's all things we need to be mindful of for sure. But going back to the question, geographically, I do see a difference. But
Steph, your point about the overall package is really important, because as a charity and not-for-profit organisation, we have to bump up our benefits package to try and match some of the salaries that people might be paid down in London and further afield. So the benefits package is critically important, especially nowadays with flexible working and hybrid and all that kind of thing. So that's a very good point.
A question's been asked in the chat. I'm just going to jump straight to Sabina's, and then we'll go back up one because it's in line with this. Some companies have a certain percentage they can go up by. What if the salary is also below the pay for the position you're in? How do you go about that? That makes sense. I don't know whether, Sabina, you want to actually ask that question.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Sabina.
Hi, so yeah, basically, as a graduate, when you start, you're not particularly paid as much, but if you progress through the ranks quicker, I did find myself being very low compared to where I should be, and that is probably about 50%. And when I had this conversation, they're like, no, we can really go up by 10%. In certain intervals as well, so maybe 8 months or every 1 year in PDR. And I just didn't know how to negotiate, and what I was asking for was way too much compared to where I was. So eventually I had to leave the company, and then when I went to the next one, I did get a 50% pay rise. So I just don't know how, if I want to get out with the same company, how do I go about it? Because pay is a crucial element.
So I think, to summarise what you've just said, it's quite difficult to hear what you've said. I don't know whether the panel thought that, but I think this is to do with companies having set percentages that they can't go above. So if you've started on a lower salary, then trying to get an extra 20% to be in line with, say, a QS or something, can be quite difficult. Steph, how have you dealt with that in the past in your roles, when you've had people maybe on graduate or trainee roles and then trying to push for that higher salary when they move into that more senior position?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think it's hard. I mean, we see it in the likes of BAE Systems, for example. I know my husband works there, and you're not allowed more than 10%, or there's certain grades that you can't go above, and I think that does make it difficult. However, it's interesting because some of these organisations also don't have a high turnover, and I think it depends on the situation, so it's hard to sort of answer in bulk, but I would say, again, document your case. It's not to say just because that's the process that they can't go out, but there might be instances where they can, and without asking the question and getting the feedback as to why that process is that way or why they can't go out of that process, then that's sort of that first part. If they still can't do it, then it does become tricky. I think you'd have to maybe look elsewhere, do your external benchmarking, and don't necessarily have to leave. I would say explore all options first, document it, but again, it's on the employer. If you've raised it to them, you've had the conversation, there's clear communication, then there isn't much more you can do. And there's been instances in my career where I've had to just move to get the pay increase that I need, and I think there's a lot of research out there that shows a lot of people do have to move, and it's not to say it's the right thing, we shouldn't necessarily have to, but that's probably not even on a gender pay gap discussion. That could be a whole amalgamation of reasons as to why people need to do that to get up in their salaries. It might be that they've got a bottleneck at work where so only one person can get promoted and there's only 2 people up for that job, but there's no way you're going to get it, or there's just a whole range of things really. So I'd say just try your best to have that conversation, document it, do everything that you can to make it data driven, and if they cannot change it, then there should be a sufficient reason, and if not, then you may need to look elsewhere and to advocate for yourself really.
Cheers, Steph, thank you. So Valerie, a question for yourself. So from a leadership standpoint, what strategies or policies have you found most effective in advancing gender equality in the workplace?
I think gender equity is something that we've got to do, and we've got to see that as core to a lot of what we need to develop in diversity and inclusion. From my perspective, I think you've got to always start not with how I feel or what do people think. You've got to have that policy in place. That's absolutely crucial. You've got to be proactive, and you've got to have that inclusive culture. So I think having policies, so it's things like flexible working options, and this is not just for women, because it's for everybody, all genders, and this helps dismantle what I talked about earlier, you know, that sort of going out, drink out and about, the hustle and bustle, that hustle culture and long hours is what has been the rationale sometimes why some individuals, usually men, get higher salaries, or the big bonus. You've got to have that flexible working option. You've got to start to talk about parental leave. This is not about women are the ones that we need to look after. You know, this is about making sure that both parents help and support caregiving and mitigate against this. And what I think is the penalty against women, when you're talking about parental leave, it should be for both parents, not just for women. And when we're looking at about strategies and about our processes for pay, for promotion, allocation of work, we have to make sure that those decisions are transparent, because there are, in certain industries, I've seen men and women, there's a parity, and then you see that the promotion is based on an individual having a certain type of project, and that project usually given to a man because they'll be able to work longer and, you know, do certain things, and they'll be on the project for a long period of time because this woman may go off and have caring or responsibility or maternity. It's against the law. And so we've got to make sure that our processes for pay, promotion, and the allocation of work, because I've seen again, pay, yeah, parity. Promotion, yes, there's a promotion board, etc. But you are not going to get women promoted and then being able to get that higher salary if all of that is based on the work they're giving. And if the more interesting work is given to a man because there's certain assumptions, that is what's going to keep people back, particularly women. And RIBA's work with the Fawcett Society explicitly aims to create an action plan, which is not just going to be for architects, it's going to be for the entire profession. So we want as well, not just architects, not just employers, not just those employed, but the educators and government to be able to recognise they have a role in this as well. And I think that also the whole thing with what we're doing with the Fawcett Society is not just saying, here are the facts, how awful. These are some of the things that could change, but it's down to you. What we're looking to do is building a business case for change, showing that there is a return on investment if you invest in equity and change. And what we want to do as well is to look at what has worked well in other sectors so we can learn and adapt. And I think whatever we learn, you and others in the built environment would learn as well. So there's a lot here, and it's all about the policies, all about your strategies, but you have to have that business case as well to make sure that change will happen and it will be impactful.
Cheers, Valerie. Thank you. Steph, have you got anything to add to that from a HR perspective with policies? And I know Simon was saying before as well about it's not always just the packages, it's not just your salary. I think you said this as well, Steph. It is everything else together, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I really like what Valerie said. Again, it goes back to that policy as well. And it's just that the onus is on the business to be transparent. I think that word is just so vital in this. If we're not going to be transparent, then we're never going to get to where we want to be. And I think, is it David that's put in the chat, is when is it on the directors to do the right thing? Well, now is the time. We need to be transparent. We need to have policies in place, and we need to help things get better, because they're still not, and we're still a way off, if I'm honest, in a lot of places. So yeah, there's a lot more we can do. But yeah, no, I think hit the nail on the head. That's it from me.
The next question is, and Steve, I'll throw this at you, to the male on the panel. How do we ensure that equity conversations are inclusive and not just seen as a woman's issue?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Historically, it was always trying to do it to appease a certain individual or a certain lady because she has a problem, as opposed to making it carte blanche about everyone. I mean, I'll do a bit of a reversal on that. There's a lot going on in the background. Is that someone's mic? Can everybody else hear that? It sounds like someone's just fallen down the stairs. Sorry about that. And yeah, so we have it in our organisation, or had it in our organisation. We don't do remote work, and we don't do hybrid work, and we don't do 4-day weeks. We're full time, and that's your lot. And then it was, but Amanda's had a baby, so Amanda can do 4 days a week. And then one of our lads come up and goes, well, I coach child's football teams. I could do with early darts. It's like, well, no, we don't do that. That's not our policy. And the flexibility was only going to seem to appease a certain individual. And that's the exact opposite of equality then, isn't it? You know? So what we had to do is look back and say, well, we've got to stop making these decisions based on, you know, what we feel is right to look after, and maybe a mother or etc. Or a certain person can't go, as Valerie was talking before, can't go do the after night drinks because you know, Jane's got to rush home to get the kids. And it's like, well, she's not part of the crew then. She's not there for the culture, because part of the culture of being in this environment is being there when we're chewing the fat, not when you're just doing the work. So it's hard, isn't it, how you can look at this and then take a better, more informed approach where you're looking over it and saying, you know, what do we need to do to make sure that everybody has the same opportunity, everybody's treated the same, everyone's in place. And how you go about that, well, that's, yeah, how do you look at it? I mean, I don't know. Valerie's probably much better articulating these kind of things than I'm ever going to be.
Valerie, going to jump in and save Steve.
I think, and I think Steve said a number of things that are relevant, but we have to involve men in the conversation and in leadership roles on these issues. And I think that he gave a great example that we have a policy on X and no one can do anything but X, apart from if you've just had a baby. Well, then, no, we got to look at everybody, and there's different needs, etc. And I think that I've been in a major conference, and it was women's only discussion about how we can improve the working environment and conditions for women in the built environment. And I was a keynote speaker. And then somebody said, gosh, there's a group of men who've come in. We should tell them to go. And I said, well, we never said men couldn't come. It was assumed, oh, those silly women are all going to be talking about something. But a group of men thought, well, what are these women talking about? We think it's important to hear. I said, let them stay. And they came in and they all sat in the front and listened. And I talked to a few of them afterwards. But they started to recognize that all of us, are working in organizations where we've got diverse teams that need to be more innovative and produce better outcomes. And if you don't have an inclusive culture, and if you constantly have men who just have one way of thinking and operating, there is untapped skills and abilities that we're not going to be utilizing. And if you're looking at the bottom line, you should be doing flexible work and fair pay and a respective culture for everybody. And so for men, this isn't a women's issue. This is a business case for change and an equitable issue for any organization. And the time is now. We don't want more talking. We want some real action, and we need to engage all those men who are allies in this piece of work.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point, that, Valerie. I think it is quite important for the men to come along, and that's why we try and invite the men along to these events. While it's a network event, it is for everyone, because it is about having that open conversation and getting the allies on board who can helpfully bring everyone on the journey with us. Right, we try and keep these things to time, because I know obviously people have got to be cracking on with their jobs. So we've got 8 minutes left. So I'm just going to jump to one of the other questions and ask each of you, what action do you believe could make the biggest difference in closing the gender pay gap? So Valerie, should we start with you? What's one action that we could do?
I think that what we're saying is that we want to have no pay gap. So to do that, I think we should be talking about the true zero. And what we should be talking about is we should have a culture of total transparency where all organizations, regardless of size, publish their pay equity audits and action plans. It's not as onerous, because it was always said, oh, if you've only got 10 staff, oh, this is going to be a big job that I have to do. It's absolute nonsense, absolute nonsense. So I think that we want to see that there is an industry commitment and all organisations on gender equity, but we want that now. And I think, how can we do that? What can we do to make sure that we do that? Well, I think we have to be saying there's mandatory gender pay gap reported with a requirement for time-bound action plans. Because there's no point that for 10 years somebody says, yep, I've reported, we've got, a pay gap, and I'll do that next year and the year after. We have to make sure that they have an action plan and somebody is held to account. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. And you can report that in your annual report and your accounts, etc. But no, there is, what is the incentive? What is the incentive? And I think that's what we need to think about, is moving from passive reported to active accountability. And then there is going to be some action, but I'll just stop there because of time. Yeah, that's the one thing. That's the one thing. Okay. Mandatory gender pay gap reporting.
Fab. Steph, what would you say would be one?
I would have agreed with that. However, probably once you've got that in place, the next action I would say to have lots of women on your leadership board, where the decisions are made at the top. We need females on there. We need advocates. Yeah, I think, and that isn't just gender. I think that's any sort of demographic. We need a fair, equitable sort of board team on that to help make the decisions. Would be the next action from me.
Steve, have you got another?
Yeah,
one?
I mean, Steph's just stole me words there. I think that the
sorry.
one thing, not at all. One thing we've got to see is we've got to see more women in leadership roles. And that way, by nature, the gap in terms of disparity is closed, because if you've got more men being paid more, then the gap's there. If you've got women in leadership roles, they're increasing what they're on. The gap instantly decreases. When you've got historically what was seen as the woman's role in business was the support role, the admin role, that's got to go. You've got to see women in director role, managing director role, really senior positions, and then naturally the gap margin decreases anyway because they're on higher paid salaries. So I think if we can address and get more people within the leadership of each organisation, it's going to naturally close the gap.
Great. Cheers, Steve. Thank you. Simon, there's actually a question for you in the chat. Well, I think it would be more for you. So it says, what do you do if your organisation does not have any banding? And does the CICS plan to have a minimum salary for membership? Some professional bodies have banding.
I saw this and I wasn't really clear what the second part of the question meant. Do we have a minimum salary for membership? We don't have any minimum salaries. We don't have banding. There's only 17 people in our team. And we have a very balanced approach to fixing salaries and making salaries, which I'm more than happy with. And I don't see any reason to change that at the moment. We don't intend to have any banding at the moment, no.
Sandrine, can you, are you still there? Do you want to expand on your question a little bit more?
Yeah, what I was thinking is that some professional body basically say that if you are an affiliate, then the minimum wage you should get is that. And if you are a full member, then that would be the minimum salary, which I think might help some women, because if we get paid less, but we can prove that we've got membership, then we can go back and say, well, actually, there is a minimum salary because I achieved membership. And so I know they do it in archaeology.
I think what you're suggesting is that dependent on the grade of membership you have, should in some way reflect the salary that you earn. Your membership category is specifically for the ability you've made to get to that grade in the institution. We wouldn't expect that to affect how much you get paid, albeit we believe that if you've got post-nominals going through the grades we have, it would increase your employability and would hopefully increase your reward.
Yeah, fair enough.
Cheers, Simon. Thank you. And then, Sandrine, you've also asked about it being harder for women to be on site early and back home late, and therefore the only way to do this is to not have kids. Did you want to expand on that a little bit more? Is it more of a statement rather than a question?
Yeah, I think it was going back to what Valerie said, that, if women have more responsibility, then they have to make a choice between their career and their private life, and therefore men will always get a better career than women, and so then we end up being at the bottom all the time, I think.
Yeah, Sandrine, I just want to be clear. I don't think women have to make a choice at all. What I'm saying is that an organization sometimes will have policies in place that means that anybody, and it's not always women, generally, yes, it has been, but it's not always women who may have to have caring responsibilities, and it's not always children. Sometimes people have to care for a partner, or they have to care for a family member or a neighbor. Whatever their caring responsibilities has generally fallen to women, and the structure of an organization means that sometimes on particular projects or things that happen in the evening or weekends or abroad, women may have found it more difficult to engage. But to engage doesn't mean you are at the bottom. Not to engage doesn't mean you're at the bottom of that career or promotion. And that's what I'm saying. It's about the organization and the perception of individuals who generally were men about the role of women. I have children and I am the CEO. I travel. I have a husband and I do travel. He has to look after himself if I'm not there. So it depends on relationships, but the organization you are in will support and give equity, because I may be able to go to that meeting in the evening if my husband's or my partner's firm or organization will allow them not to go to an evening and look after children or do the caring. It's a societal issue, I believe. So I wasn't trying to suggest that women will always be back, but I'm talking about there's been structures and cultures that we have to challenge and change.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a societal issue.
Simon, you've got your hand up.
I'll just add to what Valerie said. Anybody's personal responsibilities, whether it's children or caring, should not prevent you from having an enjoyable career. Both my parents are architects, and they grew up. I grew up in a family. They both worked full time, and they were more than capable of doing it. And my father took as many responsibilities for me and my brother and my sister than my mother did. And I think that's down to balancing your lifestyle and, as Valerie says, societal responsibility. Take responsibility. Don't just land it on one person.
Yeah.
Definitely. So we're at 2 o'clock, and that was our allotted time slot. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Steph, Steve, and Valerie, and Simon, our honorary panel member. Thank you so much.
A pleasure to be honorary.
Thank you so much for coming along today. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add before we dial off?
Thanks very much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you, Genna. Thank you.
Cheers, very welcome. What we'll do now is I'll get this written up and it'll go into the next journal. So for those that have missed it, you'll be able to read about it in there. But this also has been recorded. So as soon as it's been released, it will be pushed out as well so that people can catch up. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. We are at 2 o'clock. If Gemma, there are... Yes, love? Just a quick, can we make this available as a video on our website? And can we put it on socials as well, please? Yes, that will be done by Heather.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.
See you, Valerie.
Bye for now.
See you, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Simon. Pleasure.
Thank you.